day, everyone. Thank you all for joining us. I am Deputy Premier and Minister of Public Safety and Emergency Services, Mike Ellis. I want to first acknowledge that we are gathered here today on the traditional territory of signatories to Treaty 7. I also want to acknowledge the Métis people of Alberta, who, of course, have a deep connection to this land. I'd also like to acknowledge my colleague, Minister of Children's Services, Cyril Turton, who is here with us today, and Canadian country music superstar Paul Brandt, who is also here with us today for this announcement. Paul, of course, is the co-chair of the Alberta Centre to End Trafficking in Persons. I'd also like to personally thank him, of course, for his continued advocacy against human trafficking. And today I'm very proud to announce that up to $5.5 million in funding is now available under the Alberta's Combating Trafficking in Persons grant. This brand new grant is a critical part of Alberta's ongoing efforts to tackle the serious crime of human trafficking and support survivors in our province. Human traffickers prey on the most vulnerable members of our society, stripping individual freedoms, dignity and safety, and fighting human trafficking requires a multifaceted approach involving prevention and protection and prosecution. Alberta's government is committed to ending all forms of human trafficking, including labor and sex trafficking, and in 2022, Alberta committed more than $20 million over 4 years to fight human trafficking, and to date, this has included funding to create the Alberta Centre to End Human Trafficking, of which Paul has done an incredible job in co-chairing, as well as the targeted support of more than 20 community organizations, which I announced in February. These efforts have already supported countless victims and survivors, providing them with the care and resources that they need to heal and rebuild their lives. And the Combating Trafficking in Persons grant builds on this momentum. With $5.5 million in funding available for 24 and 25, this program reflects our commitment to addressing trafficking at all levels: prevention, victim protection, and of course, survivor empowerment. The goal of this grant is to provide specialized trauma-informed supports for victims of survivors of human trafficking, increased awareness of the challenges faced by victims, and reduce the risk of re-exploitation of survivors. Funding can be used to support victims and survivors along with the continuum of services. This can include immediate emergency support to help victims exit trafficking, as well as supports for survivors as they rebuild their lives and navigate long-term challenges. We know that Indigenous people are disproportionately impacted by human trafficking, and that's why this grant prioritizes projects that are, of course, Indigenous-led, or that we meaningfully engage with Indigenous communities and survivors, and of course, elders within the community. By ensuring Indigenous voices are central to the solution, we're fostering culturally appropriate responses that are going to build strong and resilient communities. To organizations, nonprofits, and community leaders all around. So please take this opportunity to apply for this funding. Your work, of course, is critical to preventing trafficking, protecting those at risk, and, of course, empowering survivors to rebuild their lives. Applications are going to be open from now right up until January the 20th. And in closing, I just want to say thank you. I want to say thank you to all those individuals and organizations who continue to dedicate themselves to combating trafficking in our communities. Your tireless efforts inspire us all, and of course, they serve as a reminder as to what is possible, of course, as we work together. So thank you, and I'd like to now invite Mr. Turton up to the podium to say a few remarks. Thank you.
Well, thank you very, very much, Minister Ellis, and good morning, everyone. I'd like to begin by thanking my colleague, as well as country music icon Paul Brandt, and every organization in the prevention of violence and human trafficking space for all of your efforts to raise awareness, prevent, and put an end to human trafficking, as well as to help survivors move forward in their healing journey. I'm so pleased today that we're taking further steps to help address this urgent and important issue by investing in the Combating Trafficking in Persons grant. For so many Albertans, it is still hard to imagine that human trafficking occurs here in our province. It happens quietly, taking different forms, including sexual exploitation. It infiltrates our communities, our places of work, our schools, and even our homes before we or its victims have a chance to recognize it. Many of us may not know that our next-door neighbor, a co-worker, a classmate, a spouse, or our very children may have been victims of human trafficking. We may not want to see it because it's so unfathomable to think that someone would commit such a vicious crime that violates another human being's basic human rights and strips them of their dignity. Sadly, as Minister of Children and Family Services, these are stories that I hear far too frequently from many individuals and organizations who work with survivors of sexual violence and abuse, including those who have been trafficked. It is not their fault, but trauma isn't easy for survivors to navigate and overcome. It can have long-lasting impacts on survivors' well-being, affecting their ability to trust, form healthy relationships, and feel safe. In fact, I've learned that children in government care are 60% more likely to be trafficked. And that's a staggering stat that we cannot afford to act on. And that's exactly why it's so important that we continue to build a fulsome network of supports to help and empower survivors and prevent this in the future. The Combating Trafficking in Persons grant will do just that. Survivors deserve peace of mind that access to vital supports they need are available, that give them peace of mind that justice will be done. And the government is making every effort to ensure that no one has to experience human trafficking, sexual violence, or exploitation. We are proud to support sexual assault centers, women's shelters, as well as child and youth advocacy centers and organizations like Little Warriors who are already doing great work to support survivors in their healing journey. We know that there is still more work to do, which is why we're working to support Alberta's organizations, nonprofits, and community leaders throughout this grant. Working together to learn about the signs of human trafficking, where to report it, and how to support survivors can help us end it together. And I encourage eligible organizations to apply by January 20th for this important grant, and I thank you again for your critical work. Together, we can build a safer, better, and brighter future for all. To anyone who may be currently experiencing human trafficking or sexual violence, help is available through Alberta's One Line for Sexual Violence at 1-866-403-8000 or the 24/7 Family Violence Info Line at 3110-1818. Thank you very much, and I'd now like to invite my good friend Paul Brandt up to the podium.
Thank you, ministers, and thank you so much for being here today. Thanks to the continued commitment of the Government of Alberta, frontline agencies and Albertans are being empowered to work collaboratively to implement a coordinated response to support survivors of human trafficking, exit their trafficking situations, and have rapid exit to specialized human trafficking specific supports, and to even prevent it from happening in the first place. The Alberta Centre to End Trafficking in Persons envisions a future free from human trafficking and its devastating effects on Albertans. It works to unite and empower communities in Alberta to disrupt and prevent human trafficking, and to support those who've been impacted by any form of trafficking to exit and build into the lives that they were intended to live. The Alberta Centre is community-led and works alongside government to disrupt and prevent human trafficking, ensuring that there's a unified, province-wide, wraparound community response model, which works on behalf of human trafficking survivors, victims, and those at risk. The average age of first being trafficked in Canada is 13 years old. Traffickers make over $280,800 per year per victim. 94% of victims in Canada are Canadian, and 93% are women and girls. Many trafficking victims know their traffickers and do not realize that they're victims of force, fraud, and coercion. This requires that data sharing, awareness, best practice training, and coordinated efforts are implemented in order to counter this horrific crime. The Alberta Centre looks forward to working with the Government of Alberta to ensure that this $5.5 million in funding is allocated to community-based organizations fostering a consistent, coordinated response to human trafficking in Alberta, with a focus on enhancing services and strengthening interagency collaboration. Through our collective efforts, we will ensure that victims and survivors of all forms of trafficking have access to essential wraparound support services as we empower partners and the public to recognize the signs of trafficking, intervene appropriately, and connect survivors with the services that they need. Thank you.
This now brings us to the question and answer portion of our announcement. I would ask any reporters in the room to take the mic, just state your name and your outlet, and we'll have one question and one follow-up.
Hi, Minister Ellis.
Hi.
My name is Jen Hodson from the Western Standard. So recently, the CBSA union head, Mark Weber, came out and said that less than 1% of all imports coming into Canada are searched, and 0 are searched when they're coming in by rail. So this also, he said, includes products or people could be smuggled into the country. So how can Canada hope for secure borders with a record like that, including the Alberta Initiatives for Human Trafficking? And what can be done to fix this problem?
Well, the statistics you just gave me are extremely concerning, quite frankly. But this is why we're not sitting idly by. This is why we made the announcement that we did yesterday. This is why we continue to do what we're doing with the Center to Combat Human Trafficking. Look, we're doing our part to try to secure the border. We certainly encourage the federal government to let us know what your plan is. Again, I have had conversations, I indicated the other day, with the CBSA, along with the RCMP. Certainly in the conversations I had with them, I certainly felt as though that, the augmenting and supporting and assistance that we will be able to provide them was welcome news to them.
Okay, good. And the criminal code indicates that trafficking convicts get between 4 years to life sentence when they're caught with human trafficking. So if all of these vessels coming into Canada aren't being checked, what do you think would actually be a deterrent to these criminals who are participating in human trafficking?
Well, maybe Paul might want to supplement that. I know he's done a lot of work on that, but I'm just going to say this on a very high level. Look, the soft on crime policies that have been put forward by this federal government have not worked. We have seen organized crime, not only in this province but throughout Canada, be able to thrive in an environment with little to no consequences. This is why we're seeing not small gangs. We are seeing large cartels, international cartels that are setting up shop, not just here in Alberta, but right throughout Canada. This is why we continue to support our Alberta Law Enforcement Response Team and that coordinated effort. This is why we are doing what we can to secure the border. But look, I mean, there has to be consequences for your actions. And I would argue and welcome, quite frankly, any changes to the criminal code that would add a bit of a deterrent to especially people who are smuggling humans and taking advantage of typically young people or vulnerable people, that there should be consequences for their actions. But maybe I'll have Paul supplement this. I know he's done a lot of work on this.
Thank you.
Thank you, Minister. Thank you for your thoughtful questions, too. One survivor sprang to mind when you were talking. I'm speaking to survivors every day now, very regularly, and because of the damage inflicted on her through trafficking in her experience in life, she's a recipient of a double lung transplant. It was just absolutely devastating, and it has lifelong impacts. I had the privilege of joining the Alberta Law Enforcement Response Team on an undercover operation recently, and we had honestly the privilege of being able to go and proactively intervene on behalf of a trafficking survivor. And she decided that she didn't want to go with us because she was such a victim of force, fraud, and coercion. This is a relational crime. A lot of trafficking victims know their traffickers. And I want to explain the dynamics of her bondage. She had her trafficker's picture on her cell phone, believing it was her boyfriend. And he was controlling her from prison with his cell phone. We got to do better. We got to do better for victims of this crime who are bearing the consequences of lifelong trauma as a result of people using force, fraud, and coercion for profit in Canada. And I think that through working together and working together with law enforcement, frontline agencies across jurisdictions and across provincial borders, and also the border in the south, is very important. That's one of the reasons, as mentioned by Minister Ellis, that we're fostering our relationships with law enforcement across Canada, with our American governmental and law enforcement and border security partners, in order to foster coordination and collaboration. Human trafficking doesn't always happen across borders, but the most recent statistics show that 25% of trafficking inflows in North America are cross-border trafficking situations. So it's important for us to focus on this. When we started this work with Not in My City 7 years ago, we were often met from different agencies across the province with the idea that human trafficking doesn't happen here. And we're seeing an awakening happening in this province now. And, you know, the dismal statistics that you brought, I think what it actually does is provide an opportunity for education and awareness. And that's a part of what the Alberta Centre intends to be doing. So thank you for that.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Hi, my name is Jiren Mansukani, and I'm with the Calgary Herald. My question, I think, is probably suited for Paul. Sure. You know, I just wanted to ask you about where the government is in terms of tracking routes for human trafficking. Can you talk about some of the measures taken by the government agencies this year to shed light on that and maybe even fill gaps through which a lot of these people are entering the province?
Yeah, so the acronym they use is ATNGO, so anti-trafficking NGOs, and I think that aside from the work of the government, the frontline agencies and anti-trafficking not-for-profits are starting to get to the point where we're doing better work at collecting the data and actually telling the full data story of what's happening with human trafficking, specifically with human trafficking inflows and the direction that traffickers are moving victims. The the Canadian Centre to End Trafficking has done some excellent work in their Corridors report that came out a couple of years ago that shows the routes that are often taken and the modes of transportation that are taken when victims are being moved by traffickers. It's also important to state that human smuggling and human trafficking are two different things. Trafficking specifically, which we're talking about today, is force, fraud, and coercion facilitated by a third party. And the reason that we know that traffickers are moving victims, in part it's to elude law enforcement, but it's also to find different areas that they can go to actually make more money. So, you know, traffickers are often moved from Eastern Canada into Alberta because often they can make more money with victims in Alberta. And there are predictable routes, and we're doing some great work, I think, primarily recently here in Alberta through our partners at the at YYC at the Calgary International Airport. Just in this last few months, we've been able to intervene and work with and support human trafficking victims and get them back connected with their families again and transport them back because of this rapid community wraparound that's happening. But the important part, I guess, to address your question is knowing that victims are being moved by traffickers. We're aware of that, and we know the routes. Now it's about creating that rapid community response. And I think that the sector is doing a really good job of that, and we've had some great statistics. The most recent yesterday that came out, a UN report on the issue of trafficking shows that 25% of trafficking in North America is actually cross-border trafficking that's happening, and we know of incidences that are going south and coming north into Alberta.
I have a follow-up, but before that, you mentioned that in the last month you had intercepted or at least helped victims. Do you have a number of how many victims did you actually support?
There is in the last few months, I would say the last 2.5 months, there have been 4 individuals.
Okay.
Yeah.
And
at the airport.
One of the things that is missed in terms of talking about trafficking is labor trafficking. I'm curious, you know, what the government is doing in terms of addressing this big issue.
Well, addressing it, I would say, is very important to us. We know that the majority of human trafficking victims in Canada are victims of sex trafficking. The international statistic is at 69%. There is obviously a concern for labor trafficking as well, and that's something that the Alberta Centre is also addressing. You know, I think that when it comes to the issue of sex trafficking, labor trafficking, organ trafficking, there are over 21 different types of trafficking that have been identified, and there are new forms of trafficking being invented almost every day. The important thing to focus on is that this is a degradation of human dignity. It's forcing people to do what they normally wouldn't do, and I think that it's incredibly important for society to address this issue, because what we're doing is we're putting a value on human life. And so from a labor standpoint, this is something that we're also engaging with our Operational Advisory Council within the Alberta Centre, engaging all the different frontline agencies that are specifically focusing on the issue of labor trafficking to ensure that that doesn't fall through the cracks either. Thank you. Yeah.
Ellis. I'm Todd from CTV.
Hi, Todd.
The current chair of the Edmonton Police Commission is retiring to Portugal. John McDougall's term expires December 31st, 2026. Is it okay that he will continue to serve on the commission while living overseas?
I think I vaguely had heard that he was moving overseas. I know his partner had moved overseas. I was not aware that he would be performing his duties while overseas, so it's the first time hearing of this. My information that's been provided to me, I'm happy to get some corrections if that is not the case, but my understanding is that he will be in Edmonton while performing the duties, and that only when he is done and retired will he be moving to Portugal, where his partner lives.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, thank you.
Do we have any more questions from the room? Operator, do we have any questions on the line? We don't?
No question at this time.
Okay, thank you, everyone. This concludes today's announcement.
Thank you.